folks are in general in rebellion, but it is very different to be in rebellion against them if you know what they're for, and it's a Chesterton's fence problem, right? Those things existed for a reason. I very much agree with your point that birth control is the first step of transhumanism. I did not realize that until you said it, but it immediately struck a chord that transhumanism begins with the ability to control when and how frequently you reproduce. And that is, in my opinion, a powerfully good thing to have control over. But what did not come with it was any sense of how many things were downstream from it. So there was no ability to generate a new kind of wisdom about, okay, given that a woman is now free to choose when to reproduce, what else that, was once part of a coherent way of organizing a society is now suddenly going to be cut adrift. And where we find ourselves now is in a kind of painful, counterproductive chaos in which people have gained sexual liberation, but they do not appear to have gained sexual satisfaction out of it. They just have a kind of technical...
On the contrary, in fact.
Right. They appear to be addicted and dissatisfied en masse, which suggests that there's something. And, again, I would point to the question of, is it inherently a mistake to engage in technological family planning? I don't really believe so, but I do think that what we did downstream of that change has been, I won't say an unmitigated disaster, but it's been a mitigated disaster. There have been many positive things, but wow, have the consequences for human flourishing been mixed.
I think that's absolutely right. Now, I really want to emphasize again that this is not about me just saying we have to turn the clock back and we have to put all of these technologies back in their box, because A, that's not possible, and B, the social mores that we had before are now so completely gone and have evaporated with really the generation before my mother's generation. Perhaps my mother's generation was the last to hold really to pre-sexual revolution mores in any numbers, and we're a long way along from that now. And things have changed so radically even since I was young and at the sharp end of the quote unquote sexual marketplace, which is an idea which I dispute, in its as a frame for what sexuality is and how it functions and how it ought to function. I think the fact that it's become normalized to refer to the process of mate choice and mate formation as a sexual marketplace. We could spend another hour unpacking what that term means and why it's such a category error when it comes to what sexuality is for and how we should be thinking about it. But I think it speaks volumes about what exactly we're getting wrong, and how it is that we're thinking mistakenly about it, to think of it as a marketplace, to think of it as something which is individualistic and transactional, and in which everybody must of necessity be pursuing their own interest. That's just a fundamentally mistaken way to think about what sexuality is and what it's for, and how it can be used, how it can be a healthy and beneficial part of who we are as humans.
Well, I would push back very slightly. I think I agree with the sentiment, but I would argue that this is a case where what sex breaks down into, if you disrupt the higher version of it, is a marketplace, right? That it's a lower state of existence. And it's very hard to make the case, especially to people who are addicted to some product produced in that marketplace, that they have given up something, the name of which they don't even know, right? That there is something...
Well, yes, this is exactly it. Sex shouldn't be a marketplace, but it is.
Yes.
This is where we are now.
Very well said. Yeah. Sex shouldn't be a marketplace, but it is. Very well said. Yeah. Sex shouldn't be a marketplace, but it is. And it is interesting. I don't know. My social group is, of course, idiosyncratic, but it is interesting how frequently I am now running into the pattern of women, let's say in their mid-30s and onward, waking up to their own philosophical error, discovering that things that they were convinced of, they now believe were not in their interest, and making a radical change in their trajectory, which I think is very positive, but it's also a bit tragic that it comes late. In other words, that something about the messaging that society is delivering to these women when they're very young is irresistible. And, how much better off? Well, I will make two arguments. One, it would be great if you had that wisdom early on so that you could avoid the pitfalls earlier in your life, because it's not that those costs go away entirely when you wake up, right? Some of those costs are just simply permanent. But that it is also the case that in order to understand why this sexual marketplace that things have broken down into is so pervasive, one need only look at the plight of an individual woman, especially who attempts to opt out, right? In a world where people have become very transactional about sex and effectively have started swapping in quantity for quality, not realizing that they've given something up, a woman who decides not to make that error has very little access to anyone's attention. And I believe it is that tragedy that makes it impossible or not impossible, but very unlikely for the culture to substantially correct its course, right? It's a vicious cycle.
I'm cautiously optimistic on that front, but I think it will take a wholesale mutiny by the next generation of hot girls.
Yeah,
so pretty much a huge amount of culture is downstream of what the hot girls want.
I 100% agree with you. That is exactly right. And the problem for that opportunity is that those hot girls now have access. The hottest girls can monetize that hotness in a way that is disproportionate, and therefore they are disincentivized to do so, because effectively they may have given up something in terms of human satisfaction and well-being, but they've gained a tremendous amount of earning capacity, which is misleading to women who don't have those opportunities. It's like NBA stars leading people to think that, if they play the game really well, that they're going to end up rich, when the answer is no. That's only true for people in the very tail of a distribution. It's not true in general. So I worry about.
Yeah, time will tell. To be honest, the worst case scenario is as you describe it. The hot girls go on setting a terrible example for everybody else. A more optimistic scenario sees enough of a backlash that also has a trickle down effect. And I see, to be honest, I see evidence of both, and I don't know which way it's going to go yet. But I'm cautious because I choose to have hope for humans generally. I prefer to think that enough women are going to wake up and decide that this is just not working.
Well, I guess I would put my hope. I would put my hope somewhere slightly different. I put my hope in people like you and Louise Perry and Bridget Fedesi and my wife Heather Hying, who are presenting a very powerful case that is not. I mean, even in your framework, which does argue for a rejection of modernity in, I think, no uncertain terms, even in your case, you are not really laying out the case for a return to somewhere in the past. You are laying out the case that many of the things we have abandoned from the past, we did so at our peril, and that we should think about how they might be recovered, which I think is the right way to look at the puzzle.
I think that's right. I found a wonderful quotation from the Colombian aphorist Nicolas Gomez Davila, who says, "The true reactionary is not a seeker after abolished pasts, but a hunter of sacred shades on the eternal hills." Those are words to write by for me. We can't go back.
Yeah, we can't go.
There's never a going back. We can't go back.
This is one of Heather and my principles. We cannot go back. There is, in fact, nowhere to go back to.
Exactly. There's nothing left to conserve. There's no going back.